It was a brisk autumn evening when my friends, Dan and Jessica, convinced me to explore the old Miller mansion on the outskirts of town. The place had been abandoned for over 50 years, its owners disappearing without a trace in 1968. Local legends spoke of strange occurrences, but we were skeptical, attributing them to overactive imaginations. We arrived at the mansion just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows over the decrepit structure. The house loomed before us, its windows dark and empty, like the eyes of a long-dead corpse. Vines and overgrowth choked the exterior, and the front door hung on rusted hinges. I hesitated at the doorway, but Dan pushed past me, his flashlight cutting through the dimness. "Come on, it's just an old house," he said with a nervous laugh. Jessica followed him in, and after a moment's pause, I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of decay. Our footsteps echoed through the empty rooms, which were filled with broken furniture and scattered debris. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the wallpaper peeled away in long strips, revealing the skeletal framework of the house. We made our way through the ground floor, our flashlights revealing nothing beyond the expected of a long-abandoned house. Then we found the staircase, its wooden steps groaning under our weight. As we ascended, the atmosphere grew heavier, more oppressive, as if the house itself resented our intrusion. The second floor was even worse. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and the air felt almost suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though I dismissed it as paranoia. We split up to cover more ground, each taking a different room. I chose a small bedroom at the end of the hall. The bed was still made, its once white sheets now yellowed with age. A dresser stood against one wall, its mirror cracked but still intact. I shone my flashlight around, noting the remnants of a life left behind. A child's toy, a hairbrush, a book lying open on the floor. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper. I froze, straining to hear more. The whisper came again, clearer this time, and unmistakably coming from behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the room. The mirror. Something was wrong with the mirror. In the cracked glass, I saw my own reflection, but a shadowy figure was standing behind me. Heart pounding, I whipped around, but the room was empty. I turned back to the mirror, and the figure was gone. I bolted from the room, nearly colliding with Jessica in the hallway. She looked as terrified as I felt. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Before I could respond, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the house. It was Dan. We raced towards the sound, finding him in the room at the far end of the hall, pale and shaking, pointing at the wall. There, scrawled in what looked like blood, were the words, "Get out." That was enough for me. We fled the house, our flashlights bobbling wildly as we ran. Outside, we didn't stop until we reached the car, gasping for breath. Dan, usually so brave, was visibly shaken. "I saw them," he said. "The Millers. They were standing right there, staring at me." We never spoke of that night again, each of us too afraid to acknowledge what we had experienced. The Millers' mansion still stands, a silent sentinel on the edge of town, its dark windows hiding secrets best left forgotten. And me, I've never set foot in another abandoned building ever since. Some places, I've learned, are better left alone. It all started with the notes, simple, innocent at first. The first one appeared on my windshield one evening after work. "You look nice today." I shrugged it off, assuming it was just a harmless compliment from a secret admirer. But they kept coming. More notes, each progressively more personal and more invasive. "I love the way you laugh," read one. "Red suits you," said another. Left on my desk at the office. It was then when the unease began to creep in. How did this person know where I worked? Who were they? I tried to ignore it, to push the anxiety away, but ignoring it didn't stop the notes, and it certainly didn't stop the feeling of being watched. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me, at the grocery store, during my evening jogs, even at home. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was never truly alone. One night, I was walking home from my friend's house. I saw him for the first time, a figure standing under the streetlight, too far away to make out any features, but close enough to instill a sense of dread. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder until I reached my apartment and locked the door behind me. The next day, a new note was waiting for me. "You walk fast, I like it." My stomach churned, and I finally decided to go to the police. They listened, took my statement, and told me they would keep an eye out. But without a direct threat, there was little they could do. Days turned into weeks, and the notes continued. They began to include more details of my daily routine, making it clear that whoever this was, they were following me closely. "You had a coffee with Sarah today. Seemed so nice. The blue dress is my favourite." I changed my routes, altered my schedule, but nothing helped. The notes kept coming, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. My friends were concerned, urging me to stay with them, but I didn't want to disrupt their lives with my problems. One night, I returned home to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped inside, calling out nervously, "Hello, is there anyone there?" Silence. I cautiously moved through the apartment, checking each room, but found no one. On my bed, there was a new note. This one different from the rest. It said, "I was here, nice place, see you soon." Panic surged through me, and I called the police again. They searched the apartment, but there was no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. It was as if my stalker was a ghost, slipping in and out without a trace. The police presence increased around my neighbourhood, but it did little to ease my fear. I felt like a prisoner in my own life, always looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. Sleep became a luxury, as every creak and groan of the building sent my mind spiralling into dark places. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, I sat in my living room trying to relax. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at the screen. An unknown caller. I hesitated but answered. "Hello?" Heavy breathing on the other end. My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "You know who it is," a raspy voice replied. "I'm closer than you think." I dropped the phone and rushed to the window, peering out into the night. The street below was empty, but I knew he was out there, watching. I felt trapped, my safe haven violated. The next day, I packed a bag and left town, moving in with my sister in another state. I changed my phone number, my email, everything. The notes stopped, and gradually, I began to feel a semblance of normality. But even now, months later, I still look over my shoulder. I still check my windows and doors twice before bed. The fear never truly leaves, and I don't think it ever will. The wind howled outside as I sat in my dimly lit living room, the only source of light coming from the flickering TV. The storm had knocked out the power an hour ago, and I had been trying to distract myself with an old horror movie on DVD. It wasn't working. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the trees outside, seemed to amplify the oppressive darkness. I had moved into the old Victorian house a few months ago. The previous owner, an elderly woman, had passed away under mysterious circumstances, but I hadn't let that bother me. The price was too good to pass up, and I needed a fresh start. But lately, things had started to feel off. I would hear footsteps in the attic, though I knew I was alone. doors would creak open on their own, and there was the feeling of being watched, always, from the shadows. As the movie ended, the screen went black, and I was left in silence. I decided it was time for bed. Grabbing my flashlight, I made my way up the creaky staircase to my bedroom. The narrow hallway seemed to stretch endlessly in the darkness, each step echoing like a drumbeat. I reached my bedroom door and paused. The feeling was back, that prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I turned quickly, shining the flashlight down the hallway, but saw nothing. Shaking my head, I pushed open the door and stepped inside, closing it firmly behind me. The room felt colder than usual, and I hurried to the bed, pulling the covers around me. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself that it was just the storm, just my imagination, but sleep didn't come easy. I awoke suddenly in the middle of the night, heart pounding. The room was pitch black, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came back: the storm, the power outage, the creepy old house. I listened intently, straining to hear over the pounding rain. There it was again, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the attic directly above me. I froze, holding my breath. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were right above my head. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed with fear. Then, as suddenly as they had started, the footsteps stopped. Silence. That kind that presses in on you and makes your ears ring. I forced myself to move, to get out of bed. I needed to see what was up there, to prove to myself that it was just nothing. Grabbing the flashlight, I crept out of my room and down the hall to the attic. My hands trembled as I reached for the handle. The door creaked open, revealing the narrow staircase leading into the darkness. Taking a breath, I began to climb. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, and the air grew colder with each step. At the top, I found myself in the attic, a dusty, cluttered space filled with old furniture and boxes. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Then I saw it. In the far corner, something moved. I swung the flashlight around, and there, standing by an old wardrobe, was a figure, a woman, her face pale and eyes hollow, staring straight at me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She moved toward me, her movements jerky and unnatural. I stumbled back, tripping over a box and falling to the floor. The flashlight rolled away, leaving me in the darkness. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding in my chest. I could hear her now, her raspy breathing, the sound of her bare feet on the wooden floor. I ran, down the stairs, through the hallway, and into my room, slamming the door behind me. I leaned against it, gasping for breath. Silence. Had I imagined it? No, the fear was too real. I had seen her. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed by the door, listening and waiting. The storm passed, and dawn broke, bringing the light and a semblance of safety. But I knew I couldn't stay. The house wasn't mine. It never had been. It belonged to her, and she wanted me gone. The woods behind our old family cabin always had an eerie feel, especially at night. Growing up, my grandmother used to warn me about the silent ones who roamed the forest. Beings who would steal your voice if they found you after dark. I always dismissed it as folklore, meant to keep kids from wandering too far. But now, as an adult, I wasn't so sure. One autumn evening, I decided to walk through those very woods. The air was crisp, the leaves crunching underfoot as I ventured deeper. The sun began to set, casting long shadows that danced like spectres among the trees. I checked my watch. It was getting late, time to head back. As I turned to retrace my steps, I realised the path looked unfamiliar. Panic set in. The trees, twisted and gnarled, seemed to close in on me, their branches reaching out like skeletal figures. I quickened my pace, hoping to find a familiar landmark. That's when I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, carried on the wind. It was crying for help. It was a child's voice, fragile and distant. I stopped, straining my ears. The voice seemed to come from deeper within the forest. Against my better judgment, I followed it. The further I walked, the more distorted the forest became. The once vibrant foliage turned sickly and decayed, and the air grew thick with the stench of rot. I heard it again. The voice was clearer now, just ahead. I stumbled into a small clearing and froze. In the centre stood a young girl, no older than 8 or 9. Her dress tattered and stained with mud. Her eyes were hollow, devoid of life, yet they seemed to plead with me. "Are you lost?" I asked, my voice trembling. She nodded slowly and pointed to a narrow path leading deeper into the woods. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but something in those empty eyes compelled me to move forward. We walked in silence, the oppressive quiet only broke by the occasional snap of a twig. I tried to make conversation, but the girl never responded. She just kept pointing ahead. My unease grew with each step. I felt as if I was being watched, the sensation of unseen eyes boring into my back. Finally, we reached an old cabin, one I had never seen despite all my years of exploring these woods. The girl stopped at the door, looking at me expectantly. I reached for the handle, the wood cold and damp under my touch. As the door creaked open, a wave of nausea washed over me. The interior was dark, the air was thick, with dust and decay. "Is this your home?" I asked, turning to the girl, but she was gone. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The walls were lined with old, tattered photographs, their subjects' faces scratched out. An overwhelming sense of dread settled over me. Then I heard it, whispers echoing from the shadows. They grew louder, more insistent. I stumbled back, desperate to escape, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The room grew colder, my breath visible in the air. Shadows stood in the corners, taking on ghastly shapes. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My voice, my very breath, seemed to be sucked away. In the midst of my terror, I saw her again, the girl, standing in the doorway, her eyes now filled with malice. She opened her mouth, and from it flowed a torrent of whispers, voices of countless souls trapped in this cursed place. I realized then that I had become one of the silent ones, doomed to wander the forest, voiceless and forgotten. My only solace was the hope that someday someone would heed my call for help and maybe, just maybe, find a way to break the curse. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and check out my other horror stories on the screen now. And until next time, sleep tight.